My name is Lauren Vaughn, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Biological Sciences. And so, like I said, I'm going to give you an overview of artificial intelligence use in and out of the classroom, and especially as it pertains to personalized learning. And so what I want to make sure that you understand by the end of this is that AI helps to provide a more enriching and personalized environment for students that really helps them to encourage them to become more engaged in the coursework. And what I'm hoping for as a happy consequence is that it increases the inclusivity and diversity of the conversations being had in the classrooms. So let's start with personalized learning, which just very broadly means that you're customizing the learning experience for each of your students and just helping to maximize the experience based on their needs and abilities. And so one of the many ways that you can do this is thinking about learning styles. And so the goal really is to try and play to a combination of all of these. So play to the strengths of each of the students and give them the resources so that they can choose what is most successful for them. Now, personalized learning can also mean giving students options for how to complete a certain task. And so sometimes it can be what topic they're covering for a project or how they're expressing their knowledge. So give them a choice of a presentation, a wiki, a blog, a podcast for their preferred learning method. And then by incorporating this personalized learning, you help the students feel more satisfied, they improve their motivation, their engagement, and it can actually increase their self-reflection, and that's going to lead to improved outcomes. So in classroom, most of the time is going to be the professor giving a presentation, but out of classroom is equally important. So you have things like homework, group projects, discussions, and studying. But the biggest problem here is how are you able to give these students so many options and providing flexibility, especially if you teach more than one class or your class size is larger than 20 or 30 students. And that's where artificial intelligence comes in. We actually interact with AI all the time on a daily basis. So computational AI is a huge aspect of our everyday lives. And basically, anytime we're interacting with the internet, it's being tailored to us by AI. AI is also important for accessibility, so generating transcripts and just making education and media more accessible, and plays a huge role in social media, so connecting people and topics based off your interests. So now what we're going to do is combine these two by seeing how using AI can increase the availability of personalized learning, especially when scalability feels near impossible. So the goal is to make the instruction relevant to the students by drawing upon interests and experiences and all the knowledge that they're bringing to the classroom, and that really helps them to better embody the course topics. So first is make sure what you're offering is working, which sounds obvious, but I think a lot of us have trouble sometimes self-assessing and adapting our class. So change things up, see what students like, what they don't like, and what they seem to react to the best. Next is you have to compromise between giving as much personalization as possible, but you have to know the limitations of your classrooms. And so you still have to be able to grade all of these and give individualized feedback. Third is that this is meant to be a tool, not a replacement for instructors. So it aids you in both in and out of classroom activities. It doesn't replace you. And last, be smart about your options. So don't offer 100 different options just for the sake of choice, but you can try and introduce meaningful options depending on whatever your goal for the project is. Students and universities are already using AI. Some of the most common websites are things like Wolfram Alpha, which, as you can see on the right, covers a whole bunch of topics that mostly helps with computational needs, but can also help with basically helping you find information on certain topics. Khan Academy and Duolingo are also using adaptive learning. And so what they do is they give you a quick test to see where's your level of knowledge now, and then basically adapts to that and helps you to build and learn on top of it. Other commonly used things are plagiarism software like SafeAssign, proctoring services that analyzes webcam videos like Respondus, and writing proficiency systems. And this one, the one that's used by the GRE, is an e-rater. And so basically they have each essay is read by a computer and a human, and then those are compared, as well as chatbots. So there's been evidence of people generating chatbots to basically field student questions. So those that are really common. So when's exam one? When is homework due, kind of thing. The chatbot can answer that. And especially if you have really large class sizes, it eliminates the huge amount of emails that you can receive. Another part of this is going to be crowdsourcing, which is a really important part of a lot of AI systems. And so things like Google Maps and Waze are going to be collecting data from a whole huge number of users, and it's going to be collecting it basically at all time. And it does this so that it can determine real-time traffic conditions and then calculate the fastest route for you to get home. And it's going to be able to do this because the users are providing this information for free, and that vastly increases the scalability. And the users do it because then they're also able to benefit from the information that's collected. And the same idea is being used in science. This is called citizen science or community science. And there's a lot of websites that allow you to participate. Basically, anyone who's interested, you don't need to have a degree or any sort of qualifications, all ages. Now, other websites have generated a platform for different groups to then put their projects on, things like Zooniverse. And so Zooniverse is a platform so that different groups can put up their projects for crowdsourcing or citizen science help. Now, Zooniverse themselves covers a lot of different topics, including things in biology like identifying mitochondria from pictures. And the researchers can then take all of this crowdsourced data and use it to train an AI system to get better and better at mimicking humans' capability of identifying patterns. And websites, including Universe, usually have some education applications where you can take part and actively incorporate it as a part of your class. Another big way that I like to introduce personalized learning into my class is through discussions. Because discussions help students interact with the material, they become more engaged, and you can actually do this in a few different ways. So the first is freeform, and this is what we use our course cafe on Blackboard or a GroupMe chat for. It's a general chat room, students ask questions, they get to know each other, look for resources. It's just an unstructured conversation. The next is instructor-led, and so in this case, the instructor gives some sort of prompt, and then the students respond to that particular prompt. So things like case studies or a general question from within the material that you've discussed recently. The last is inquiry-driven discussion. So the students are allowed to choose their topic openly within whatever constraints that are set by the class. So I call these freestyle discussions, and I allow students to pick out what they find most interesting, and they discuss it. So it doesn't have to relate to that week's topic, it just has to relate to genetics in general. And I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from students because they're excited that they can share their interests and they can see what other students are also interested in. Now, especially in an online class, the students really like both the freestyle and case study discussions because it's really a way for them to actually get to know their fellow students better. And it's through a prompt in some way, so they're having valuable, relevant, and diverse conversations. And so one of the big things I like about this is that the goal is to be able to increase the equitability, engagement, and motivation in students because they're controlling the direction of the conversation, but it's also giving diverse perspectives an equal platform. So everyone gets to say their part. It's not only the student that's the loudest or scores the best or writes the longest prompt. So again, the big issue is scalability. You can do all of this on Blackboard, all three types. I've tried, and for freeform and instructor-led, like case studies, it works really well for both grading and actually giving individualized feedback. But the problem becomes being able to then scale it up for the inquiry-driven discussion. So a single posted question is relatively easy in theory to grade, but then when the students start giving responses, they could be responding to a question from this week or last week or 5 weeks ago. And then in addition to finding out where the activity is actually happening, you need to monitor to make sure that students are posting completely thought out questions that are meeting my requirements as well as being respectful within the classroom context. So what I've begun using for my freestyle discussions is a website software type thing called Packback. Really, there's no learning curve. You can just jump straight in and use it. So students are given a form that looks about like this, where they post their question, and then they add a description, which can include media and links, and they can change the formatting, as well as provide their citations and source information. And in addition, there is real-time feedback that they get. So it's an artificial intelligence-powered feedback, and that helps them to increase their curiosity score, which is just basically making sure that they hit certain milestones. Because you want to have a certain level of quality for their content before they get graded for it. And you want them to know that before they post it. So here the students are getting instant feedback telling them, you're doing a great job, you're including all these things, or hey, you know, this would be a little bit better if you provided a source, or what about a media object, like a picture or a figure from the text that you're citing. In addition to that, Packback will also filter out profanity and other problems that you can encounter, which honestly I don't actually have a problem with. I just give them guidelines at the beginning that align with USC Honor Code, and I don't really have any issues with that, honestly. And so now I have multiple classes with about 100 students in it, and they're posting every week a question and 2 responses, and throughout the entire semester. And it's automatically graded, and it takes basically 0 effort on my part for the grading. So now instead I get to focus on finding cool questions, responding to them, or posting my own questions and providing articles that I think students are going to find interesting, as opposed to grading and enforcing guidelines. Huge downside for me is that it does cost the students money, and the costs are ever increasing. So a fellow instructor was using it for when it was around $15 a student, and it's creeping up closer to 30 now. Some other examples of AI applications in education are things like AdmitHub, which is a AI-powered messaging platform to help remind students of things that are happening in the course, and you can also just talk back and forth. And things like Otter for Education and YouTube can generate automatic transcripts and help with note-taking. Programs like Alta and Realize It are adaptive learning programs where it basically works like Duolingo or Khan Academy, where it basically tests you along the way and helps you to see you need a little bit more help here, or actually you're doing pretty well, let's move on. And then also things like virtual reality and augmented reality, which have AI components and are increasingly being incorporated into classrooms at UofSC and are really great for adding additional learning styles into the classroom for like kinesthetic and visual learners. And what's really exciting is that medical school education is also adapting a lot of these AI types of education that we've been talking about because it helps them to reach more students and tailor it to their needs. There are a lot of positives to using artificial intelligence in the classrooms that we've discussed. So you increase the ability to give individualized feedback to students, you increase diversity and inclusion, it's much more scalable to do these more personalized learning activities, it makes it more adaptable for different learning styles, and it increases in flexibility. But there are also negatives that are associated with artificial intelligence. And one of the biggest hurdles that I face is the cost. I really don't like increasing costs in my classroom. And so that's something that if I'm going to keep including it in my class, it better have a huge impact. Another huge issue is bias. And so all artificial intelligence systems are computer programs made by a human doing their best. And so there's basically every aspect of an AI system can be a bias for or against different parts, and you may not know the bias even exists, and that kind of makes it a little bit scarier. And so that's something that you don't just let go. You still need to be there to be the human person overseeing your AI overlord. Privacy is also an issue. So students are generating data, and you want to make sure that they know what of their data is being collected and then how it's being used. Where is it being shared? Right now, it can narrow your goals because AI has limitations right now. And so one way that I try to make topics more approachable in my class and personalized to students is through the use of analogy. So you take something from everyday life and apply it to a more complex topic just so it's more relatable. So on the left is a figure from the textbook, and this is showing DNA wrapped around its axis, and then what a relaxed circular piece of DNA would look like. But then if something acts on that DNA molecule and puts strain on it, it's going to physically compensate by creating supercoils so that it gets back to a relaxed state. And one of the most common examples that's used to demonstrate supercoiling is through the use of a corded telephone. So here you can see you have a long cord that has a helical structure, and then it can have additional coils added to it, mimicking supercoiling. Now this is actually a super great example, and anyone who's used a corded telephone knows immediately what you're talking about. But the problem is our students, or basically anyone born after 1995, has never used a corded telephone. So it's really not a very useful analogy for them. And same thing with a piece of yarn or twine, which is the other example in the textbook. So you've got two or more strands of material wrapped around each other, and if you add twists or you pull the two strands apart, then the rest of the twine is going to compensate physically. But again, the students are kind of like, okay, I don't really mess with twine. And so I try to offer even more examples. And so I introduce things like the use of slinkies or a garden hose or rubber bands, or a lot of times I have a hair tie on my wrist. So I'll show them my hair tie. And what I'm hoping for is that providing 5 different analogies that every student will have at least one that they have some familiarity with and they can make connections with. But again, it's all about the audience. So to get around it, what you can do is have a system where students generate their own analogy. So they choose a system they understand and apply it to a more complex topic. So they're going to break down the individual pieces of this process and then relate it to something that they understand well, and it helps them to better embody the concept. And so what's really exciting is that these analogies can actually have real-world applications. So here I'm showing a lab group was able to use a different type of rubber band structure to develop computational models of helices that occur naturally, like in the roots of plants. And I think it really illustrates that an accurate analogy is really powerful and is basically only one step away from using a model system. So in this grant, we're working to generate a system that addresses personalized learning on a larger scale using AI. And we're doing this by allowing students to self-select into the type of assignment that they feel helps them best learn a concept. So in the grant, we used oxidative phosphorylation to demonstrate the possible applications. And so we present them with a general introduction, like your regular lecture in class, and then ask them to self-select into a certain assignment based on their personal preference. So things like a traditional homework assignment where they generate an outline or a diagram and then answer some basic questions. Case studies where they're given a story from medical literature and apply information. Generating their own analogy, which we just talked about, as well as peer grading, where they are grading and assessing their fellow students' assignments. So in this case, peer grading can help to alleviate some of the burden on the instructor, but what we're really trying to work with here is incorporating AI that helps to assist with grading, provides individualized feedback during the creation of the assignment and afterwards, as well as providing individualized tools for students that helps them select their assignment that would help them the best, as well as basically tailoring resources that they would need as they're going through the assignment. And so a big question is, how are we going to accomplish this? Because it's a pretty big undertaking, and to extremely oversimplify this, it's going to be done using knowledge graphs and rubrics. And so a knowledge graph is where you basically give an AI system a paragraph, and you help to train it to generate a web of related words and actions, like you can see here. And then the student's analogy is compared to that correct web and assessed for accuracy and completeness. So you can say, well, you're missing this piece here, or the AI can or can't tell it fits in well with the web that's created. As well as rubrics. So rubrics are really helpful for identifying key concepts and enforcing learning outcomes, but it also provides equitability in grading and feedback across all of these different types of assignments, because we're allowing them to choose, so we need to make sure they're being assessed equally. So thanks for your time. I hope I give you a lot to think about.